Hey everyone, my name is Fadi Jabara, and I'm really excited to have this meeting and webinar with two of my esteemed colleagues to talk about the state of observability and kind of where we are today. Maybe get some real world life experience from some of our SREs here within Elastic, talk a little bit about how we've seen observability itself change over the years, maybe a little bit of reminiscing, if you will, and also talking about some of the problems we're dealing with. I've got two really good colleagues here that I'd like to introduce. First, we've got Lucas Moore. So Lucas, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, I'm Lucas Moore. So I'm a director of engineering at Elastic. I've been in site reliability engineering or similar related roles for about 15 years at a variety of companies, from 10-person startups to huge companies like IBM. I've been at Elastic for a little over 3 of those years, and I am responsible for our SRE teams that build, operate, and support our cloud offerings.
Awesome. Thank you, Lucas. And Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Sure. So my name is Mark Vavchuk. I am a senior solutions architect here at Elastic. And I recently came back because I've been in the SRE field for a good portion of my career, recently having led an SRE team for a major brand. But now I get to work with some of our customers in kind of building out some of the largest and most impressive observability solutions that I've seen. So really glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you both for joining us. And this is going to be a pretty lively discussion. So thanks for that. I wanted to set up our conversation a little bit by talking about 5 areas. And I think you'll find these areas pretty interesting. And it's really kind of where we are today with respect to observability, kind of how we think about observability and the maturity of it. And then, of course, everybody's hot topic, AI, ML, and what that's going to mean for observability. And then, of course, the real nuts and bolts here about, what does it cost to manage it? How are people thinking about observability, the interoperability of it, if you will, and the tools that are available to us. And then we'll end on a fun note, which is, why did you choose to be an SRE, and what fun stuff have you had being an SRE, and what would you recommend this career? So if you all are up for it, we can go ahead and get started on that first set of questions. You might see me looking down. I've got my questions written here. Hopefully I can ask some challenging stuff, and let's see if we'll get some interesting results that come out of it. So the state of modern observability. Before I begin, I want to kind of set the stage for a lot of these questions. Recently, we ran a survey around our tooling and just in general around the industry to see kind of how people thought about observability. And you'll see some of these slides in the background. We're not going to necessarily go through the slides. That's not the point of the discussion. But I do think a lot of the points that Lucas and Mark will make will probably come up during the conversation. And it's nice to have that backdrop to say that, yeah, other people are also seeing similar things that they are as well. Who knows, we might also get some differences. So we'll find out and kind of see where everybody is at this point. Having said that, teams are moving towards modern observability and kind of getting that full insight. It's trying to understand the biggest challenges that are going around and understand kind of where we are from a maturity point of view. What do you all see as your biggest challenges in SRE? And maybe I'll start with you, Lucas.
Sure, yeah. So for me, I guess first to set some context for what I think it means to move toward modern observability. To me, that mostly means shifting left. And by shifting left, I mean, I guess two things really, or at least 2 things. One, we want to move the concept of observability to earlier in the development lifecycle. So things like using observability to detect problems before they're released to production, in our pipelines, or specific example of that could be using a synthetic monitor to create a quality gate to block promotion of bad code to production. So shifting left earlier in the development lifecycle. The second thing I mean by shifting left for observability is enabling service owning or product owning teams to actually own their own observability. So nobody knows how to monitor, a service better than the people who wrote it. A surprising to me number of organizations are still focused on having this single monitoring team that creates and manages all of the alerts for everybody. And I fundamentally believe that's never going to work well at scale. It might work when you're small, it's not going to scale. So that's kind of what I think of modern observability is. One of the big challenges that comes with shifting left is you got to provide all of those service owning teams who are now on the hook for their own observability with the right tooling and best practices, maybe encoded or enforced in that tooling to actually enable them to own their observability without having to reinvent all the same stuff as all of the other teams who are now doing this too. So and as part of that, some of those things still make sense to be centralized. You don't want every team to have to figure out for themselves how do they ingest and store observability data, and how do they manage Elasticsearch and Kibana in our case. So for us, the way we try to solve that problem is our observability SRE team is focused on providing this underlying observability platform and then some standardized mechanisms for ingesting data into it. So teams can follow that, use that tooling, make sure their data is flowing, and then we give them tools to deploy their own dashboards, their own alerts, their own SLOs, stuff like that.
Interesting. I think the days of having an ops team all by themselves, where developers throw stuff over the wall and say, "Hey, not my problem anymore," is pretty interesting. It's kind of like the observability teams are now enabling the development teams to figure out how to do this stuff on their own, and I think that is hugely important. You got to feel the pain if you're going to write your own code, right? So you run and operate your own code. We'll give you the tools to do it. I think that's an important piece.
Yeah, exactly.
Mark, what are your thoughts here? What do you think your biggest challenges are?
So it's a really good question. I think that one of the major problems I'm seeing in the field out there is not instrumenting enough of your tooling because of either cost or because of complexity, and in being able to gather all of those insights into either a single platform or from a single view. It seems like that's something that has been the holy grail that people don't think exists yet. So one of them is just kind of getting that end-to-end view of what your application is doing from invocation to user interaction to completion, and being able to assure that the values that you're getting back are actually really legit. A lot of people are focusing on things like, oh, what's my P75? What's my P95? But ultimately, at scale, that's not always the best indicator, because you're going to start seeing that maybe 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 of your customers are now impacted. And I'm seeing some of my customers now can drill down to this customer at this point in this application, and they have a full view of it. So I think that that's one of the big things of challenges to get yourself instrumented properly.
Yeah, I like the way you put that there, right? There are some higher order questions that you want to answer with your observability, right? So when you think about making sure you understand, fundamentally what's going on with your platform, super important, because when chaos starts, if you don't have that data, it's really hard. So I can appreciate that answer for sure. We did another question in the survey. This is maybe the only one that I'll really point out in the thing, because it's like the so obvious kind of question. But what I really wanted to hear a little bit more from you all is kind of where you're seeing the major causes of issues. And of course, the big three culprits are showing up here, which is the system updates and patches, of course, the configuration errors, of course, and then the human errors. I mean, come on, we're all human, we make mistakes. So I think those are kind of obvious. I'd love to hear from you all kind of what you think are some of the other big issues, if not these issues themselves. Maybe you can give us some examples of what you've seen and how they've catastrophically created some problems. Have some fun with this for sure. Mark, how about we start with you?
Sure. I think a lot of it really just comes down to the good ability to do change management, and kind of what Lucas said earlier about the shift left mentality of how can I qualify whether or not this change has actually made an impact, when you're not instrumenting your lower environments and you're not enabling your developers and your product teams to really get good analysis and metrics on what they're doing. It really feels like you're kind of throwing it over the wall and hoping for the best. And I think that sort of a philosophy isn't really one that's going to take you very far anymore.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. And it's tough because the systems are getting so complex these days, right? And you think about it, it wasn't that long ago that you would, a scaled service was measured in the small number of thousands, or maybe if you're lucky, a couple 100,000. I mean, now we're hitting millions of queries a day, or in some cases billions of queries a day, dealing with petabytes of data. It's unreal. So having that good procedure, that good setup, understanding how to deal with that configuration, couldn't agree with you more. Having the maturity there matters a lot. Lucas, what have you seen? You got any good stories of hard crashes, hard fails?
Yeah, sure. So I agree with the results from this question. I'm sure this is pretty common everywhere, but something that's obvious to me as someone who pays really close attention to the volume of alerts and incidents that we have internally is how correlated they are to changes. We do weekly reviews of every single alert that our on-call teams receive and every incident that's created. And something interesting is that there's like this significant decrease in alerts on weekends, of course, like only 10% of our overall alerts and even less of our incidents happen on a Saturday or Sunday, even though those represent 30% of the week basically. So, and same for change freeze periods and change freezes over like holidays, for example. So And I have plenty of examples. I could give one that I think if you went to Elastic's status page and went back far enough in the history, you would see where we pushed out a change to all of our proxies in one of our large regions that effectively broke all of the proxies at the same time in that region 2 years ago. And that region also hosted a single point of failure for our control plane. And so not only did we cause this incident that had a big impact on customers, we also impacted our own ability to remediate the incident because stuff that we needed to access to fix the incident resided in the region that was impacted by the incident. So of course, we've since remediated the action items from that. But yeah, I mean, most of the examples I could think of and give are a result of a human making a change.
Absolutely. And I can't help myself. I mean, as SREs, I think I have to say it, it's always the network, is it not? Is it always come down to the network? How many times are we going to say that today, right?
So it's the pesky humans too, but unfortunately, computers were the challenge that we need to overcome in order to actually make things work for us in the modern world. We can't get around it anymore. It's not an option to not know how. It's an option to know as quickly as possible, and that's it.
Yeah, 100% on that. And I like the example that Lucas gave around, single points of failure. Sometimes they're not obvious, right? You think, oh, this will never happen, or even if you recognized it at all. So sometimes you go through the pain and then you learn, and then you make sure you've got observability on it so you don't have to deal with that issue going forward. So I certainly can appreciate that. I'm going to jump to our next course of topics, which is observability maturity. And here we've kind of spent a little time. I'll kind of summarize what we've been talking about, moving from essentially a reactive kind of system where maybe we had some logs, something bad would happen. People would look at it. They go jump into some logs, take a look, see what they can figure out. And then moving from logs to adding maybe some, metrics to help you root cause a little faster, to really instrumenting our system, as Mark kind of called out earlier, instrumenting our system to kind of give us a heads up before bad things happen. And I think that maturity scale is super important. But honestly, a lot of people are still stuck at that root cause phase. In order to kind of move through that maturity, they really have to work on being able to get their root causes so that they can put those fixes in to prevent those things from happening again. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit was, as we've matured, have we found that cycle actually works the other way, which is as we get more maturity, more observability, we're actually able to find root causes faster and better and understand where our systems are going. So Lucas, maybe I'll start with you. How do you think our root cause identification and resolution and action items from those root causes have come up, and how have we done with that?
I think we've done pretty well. I think we're always trying to improve there and continue to improve. For me, part of having a mature observability practice, it's tied to that shifting left that I mentioned before. So one key thing to effectively analyze root cause is, first, of course, you got to make sure you're collecting the data that you need. So if you don't have the logs, metrics, traces, other stuff that are going to help you point to that root cause, you're probably in for a long and painful incident. But then you got to, like, the shifting left is get that data in the hands of the people who have the knowledge to parse it. Those people are probably the people who wrote the service that's having the issue, not some operations only team that's, that doesn't have that hands-on expertise with the code. So those folks on the service owning team are going to be able to do a much quicker, much more accurate correlation of the various signals that they're receiving from that data back to a root cause. And then one more thing I'd throw out there as a key that I think is tied to being a more mature observability organization. A key to doing that effective analysis is you can't have too much noise. So many places have their observability tool of choice, and you start to look at dashboards and dig into alerts, and the dashboards are always lit up like a Christmas tree. And then when a real problem comes in, they start looking in those dashboards. They don't know what other alerts or errors are normal, which ones are new. That makes correlation really, really hard. So try to keep that signal to noise ratio heavily skewed towards signal, and don't alert on things that are meaningless. If you regularly get some alert that nobody does anything about, then it shouldn't be an alert. It's kind of a rule of thumb that I have. And an alert that doesn't require action is probably worse than not having that alert at all, because it can be actively harmful in a troubleshooting scenario. It's just a distraction. So, I think keeping that signal to noise ratio really move towards signal helps a lot too.
I like your answer, and actually, it's a pretty good prelude to what we're going to talk about in AI in a minute. So we'll see if you feel like AI is going to solve that for you or not. But we'll get there. But Mark, in particular, I'm interested in your customer experience on this, right? So you kind of know what we do in Elastic, but you've
Yep.
watched and talked to a lot of our customers, so you know kind of where their maturity is. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've seen, some of the best examples of people having that ability to get that root cause, and maybe some folks who are still learning how to do that well.
Sure. And so I do work with a lot of our larger customers, but I can still say that in some organizations that are still kind of entering that journey into maturity, they're trying to make sure they're ticking boxes on I have logs, I have metrics, I am doing the things I'm supposed to be doing. I figured out what a golden signal is, and now I'm going to start adhering to it. And to kind of what Lucas was saying, once you start setting up what good looks like, and you start figuring out that sometimes you just don't need to get that message. I personally happen to like the bifurcation of like information versus alert. An alert means get a human here, do something now. Information is you should be looking at this, but you can probably wait to business hours. But to give a concrete example, and I can't name names here, but one of the teams here, and this is actually, it's an operational excellence team. So they work kind of embedded with the developers. So it's a little bit of a different tack than what Lucas was talking about. They're very, very well versed on how the applications behave and how they perform. They may not be totally into the code. They were actually doing a comparison against what they saw as a real incident that took nearly an hour to determine what the target was and how to start remediation. When they instrumented our stack on top of this, they were actually able to get it down to 4 minutes. So from 60 minutes to 4 minutes, and I know I'm probably flattening that down by a little bit because I don't have all the full numbers in front of me. That's a substantial change. It's a seismic shift in, I guess, being able to get information, cut through the noise, and say, I'm not going to look at every service along the way. I now have the full path and I know how to get where I need to go. I just need to get there right now and figure it out.
For sure.
Yeah, and actually, Mark, you made me think of something that I think is relevant to this as well, which is when you talk about like the bifurcation of just information from alerts. A tool that we've found recently to be pretty effective for that is SLOs, because we can set up these SLOs and then we can have different burn rates, and then we can take different actions based on the burn rate that we're seeing. So, a lower burn rate is information that we let a team know that this is happening. Look at it in your business hours or in the next X number of days versus a much more significant burn rate that triggers an alert to an on-call person because something needs action now. And I think
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of SLOs should not be written in stone. They should be written in code, and you can make those modifications if you notice that they're not really doing what they're supposed to be doing.
For sure. Actually, it's interesting because we were not that long ago, just even internally here in Elastic, we were, a lot of our teams have SLOs set up. In fact, all of our teams have SLOs set up. And one of the things we look at is which of those SLOs can be our canary for other teams, right? Who's telling us what's going on, where you get a little bit of an early indication, and maybe you take what was going to eventually turn into a massive incident and turn it into something that maybe kind of, slips through and doesn't become a major issue. And you kind of escape it a little bit. Yeah. So I think that's a super important point. And, this whole concept of maturity and moving left, this shifting left concept, I think matters a lot. But I do think a lot of organizations are still learning how to do that. And, being really good at root cause analysis, understanding that noise, understanding how to filter through it, getting that root cause, and then putting in the practices in place and putting in the mechanisms in place to stop that thing from happening again. Fundamental. And you really got to have that observability to do it. Cool. Let's jump to the next topic, which is really around AI. And this is going to be the fun one for sure, because I think so many people have concepts of what AI is going to do. If you talk to the right person, pretty much we're not going to have a job anymore. We're done. AI is going to take care of everything. Talk to the wrong person and they'll tell you, AI is not going to do anything. You still need these seasoned, hardened SREs in order to come in and take care of stuff. I've certainly got my opinion on this. I bet you we're going to have a good fight over it. So let's go ahead and get started on it. Turns out that, part of the survey, lots of people think have lofty expectations for AI. Let's put it that way. I kind of sit more in the middle, maybe a little bit more pessimistic on AI. I'm curious to see where you all are going to be for it. So maybe, Mark, I'll start with you. What are you hoping AI is going to do for you, man?
Sure. So I love this topic because in a couple of ways, AI has kind of just come center stage. But we've been using it for a little while already, for several years, in the machine learning and anomaly detection. It kind of works in conjunction to the last couple of topics, because where you set up an SLO or you'll set up a metric that you want to know more about, oftentimes that's going to rely on I knew what I was looking for already. Whereas sometimes you can use these machine learning models to kind of track and find out what is normal. When should I worry? And by the way, can I forecast what my growth rate looks like? Because that's been a sticking point for me in my career of how much do I need to budget for next year? Well, I don't know. I'm going to be making some scientific guesses, but when I have a good trajectory, I can kind of project out a little bit better. But on the actual generative AI front, I'm seeing a lot of buzz, and I'm seeing some people who are cautious like you who are saying, hey, I don't know, everyone wants to sprinkle a little bit of AI on a product and call themselves an AI company. But I think the difference is that we can see in the companies that are actually making use of this product and the features already are you can augment a lot of knowledge that you have collected, because that's one of the pain points I'm seeing in what I consider to be a mature organization. You build a root cause analysis and you shouldn't pack it away like it's the Ark of the Covenant, kept away in some data store for forever and never looked at again. And now you can make use of it and say, hey, didn't I have something like this already? What did I do then? And have that at your fingertips, as opposed to having to kind of run around screaming with your hair on fire going, where's the SME? I like that ability to really take some of the more junior and intermediate players and make them feel better and more confident using the knowledge that's provided them within the knowledge bases and the data stores that we have.
I like that, and I totally agree with you. I once saw this analogy, which kind of hits home what you were talking about, that I think is perfect for this. Turns out, like people who mine for gold, they don't throw away the ore after they've processed it, the rocks and stuff. They keep it in a pile, and as technology gets better, they figure out how to reprocess what they've already processed to extract out more gold, right? And if you think about it, like when we process our data and we run it through our observability platforms, we kind of get an answer to it, we use it at that spot, and then we go on. But over the years, the tools get better, right? The AI gets better, can reuse that information in a way to give us more insight than we initially maybe had thought of, right? So having that SME there kind of sitting with you in your side pocket, without, through the AI assistant as an example, that makes a lot of sense. So I can certainly appreciate your answer there. I'll put a different perspective on it in a minute, but I do want to hear from Lucas. So Lucas, what are your thoughts on AI?
Yeah, so I'm somewhere in the middle. I probably am maybe a little bit closer to Fadi and a little more on the pessimistic side for now. I'm excited about the promise of AI. I think the reality doesn't match the marketing yet. I think it mostly will eventually. I guess you could call that eventually consistent marketing or something. Maybe that's just marketing, actually. I don't know. But to me, I do believe in the promise of it. I think the biggest value to me, if I think in the abstract, like what problems would I love to solve, separate from me, I want to stop problems before they happen. I want to know when they're going to happen. So using anomaly detection and predictive alerting is super exciting. It'll let us know a problem is starting based on some early signals before it's like manifested as a full-blown incident. I would say internally at Elastic, we're pretty early in this journey in terms of our SRE teams. And it's far from simple, and you're not going to just be able to enable AI and have it work. I think we're still in a phase where, again, that reality doesn't match expectations. We've started to deploy some anomaly detection-based alerts, for example, and we have some that I think we're happy with. But the elimination of false positives from those has taken a lot of time, effort, and tuning, a lot. So you just need to have the right expectations about the investment that you're willing to make to get that benefit. It's not just something you're going to turn on and you start to benefit from. I'd say in the early phase, something that might be less exciting, but actually can deliver some quick and meaningful value is just using like LLM integrations to make recommendations for troubleshooting steps. So if you're debugging an issue and you filter down to some error in your logs and you have an AI assistant that tells you, hey, here's some commands to go run on that Kubernetes cluster to help pinpoint or maybe even correct the problem, that's super valuable. We can do that today. That would have been a Google search or Stack Overflow search or something in the past. And now it's right there in a recommendation from an AI assistant right alongside your observability data. So to me, that's something that's like achievable today without much effort, that adds a lot of value. And I think the other stuff will mature over the next few years. And I am excited about where that's going. I just don't think it's quite there yet.
Yeah, oh, actually, I think you're a little bit more pessimistic than me even then. I think I said just between you and Mark. My take on it is I don't think that AI, at least in the short term, is going to be taking a level 4 engineer or 5 engineer and making them a 7 or 8 kind of level engineer. What I think it's going to do is give us the ability to multiply the impact of a level 5 engineer. So if you're at level 5 and you're doing, X amount of volume of work, I think it'll increase the amount of volume that they'll be able to do. And I also think maybe the most important part that it will be able to do is it will help the level 5 structure the questions to get maximum time efficiency out of the SME. So as an example, you've got an issue, you might want to collect certain metrics or certain data that maybe the level 5 didn't realize. AI could recommend that, run the command, get the data that you need, present it to the SME and be like, hey, this is what I'm seeing going on. What do you think I should do? And the SME is like, boom, right there, go fix that. And it takes care of it. So I think you're going to get an amplification of your SRE workforce with AI, and that I don't think is actually too far off. I'm just skeptical of at least in the short term. I'm sure, as these AI models progress, they'll get it better. But for now, I'm skeptical in the short term that I'm going to, be able to hire a bunch of fresh grads out of college who have never really operated anything and be like, here's an AI, you're good to go. It'll tell you everything you need to do.
No, I agree.
Right. So.
Yeah, I think it's good for correlation and collation of data. Things that would take you 15 minutes to gather are now right there at your fingertips, but you still need to have the knowledge of what to do with it.
I 100% agree with that. And maybe, I don't know, maybe this is self-preservation because I'd like to keep a job. So who knows, right? So there's a little bit of that in there too. But hey, it's an exciting time. I think as practitioners here, as SREs and practitioners, I think these tools are going to get really good at helping us. And I think sooner or later, eventually you will get to a point where a lot of the mundane and a lot of the basics that everybody knows how to do will be taken away. That'll be done by the AI tools, and really we'll just be focusing our skill sets on the hardest kinds of problems. And I think actually that's a win-win for the engineers. It's probably the most fun work to do anyway. It's those hard problems. Cool. Let's jump to the next section and talk a little bit about, consolidation of tools and open telemetry and cost management. Previously, when you think about the SRE role, some of these things were there and some of them weren't, but now they're starting to amalgamate into the SRE roles. It's expanded, it's become more mature in the industry, and more teams have that over operations. And I think as the SREs are getting better and better with their tooling, they're starting to think about, well, do I need all of these tools? Can I consolidate down into one? Is that a good thing? And I know there are various views on whether we should consolidate or not, and we'll have a good discussion about that. And then talking about open standards, what does that mean for us? Is open standards really super important or not? Is it better to, just live in an ecosystem and be happy in that ecosystem? So I just want to ask you all a few questions around there and think through some of the aspects of that. First question I want to ask is maybe on that open ecosystem. OTel is a really emerging and developing standard for how to have interoperability for a lot of this data. Elastic is all in on OTel. We're very big in that area. We're major contributors there. I'd like to hear your all's view on what you think OTel is going to bring to the table and how it's going to help. And obviously, it's a maturing technology. How do you see that maturity happening and going over the next course of a few years? So, Lucas, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I think obviously OTel, it's an open standard. It has clear momentum behind it. One benefit I do see is that eventually that open standard, as you said, is going to drive interoperability. That's going to give organizations more flexibility in their observability solutions, even in piecing together different observability solutions. I do think there's a lot, the kind of current state today, and Mark probably has maybe some more detail on this than I do, because we're not actively engaged in using it as end users yet. It's again one of those things where we're probably talking a little more about potential than the reality today. There's a bit of a lack of parity with existing tools that need to be addressed before we'll be able to kind of jump into OTel like full steam ahead. But so I'll admit, for me, it's something that's on the horizon. I'm not actually actively engaged in it day to day.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think a lot of people are in the same position. I'm sure you're seeing though the potential from OTel. And what's your hope for it? What do you want it to be before I jump to Mark here and let him jump in? What do you want it to be?
I want to benefit. I want everybody to benefit from like a consolidated effort around defining, like these standards and having hopefully like a smaller, more robust ecosystem, I guess I would say, like a more finite set of options, perhaps that have more development behind them. And so everybody kind of the way that open source works. So everybody benefits from that work together, rather than every company kind of developing their competing parallel standard in isolation, none of which have all of the benefits of the others, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And for me, I'll just say a couple of words before I hand it over to Mark. The things that matter a lot to me for OTel is, nobody wants to be locked into any particular thing, right? So having that standard where everybody can see it matters a lot. And I also like the idea of for lack of better words, as you said, open source, but crowdsourcing. Anybody can build a collector against that spec. Anybody can, stream in data. We understand what it is. It's well defined. It's well spec'd. Makes it so we can consume it. We know how to consume it. We know our systems are going to do it in an efficient manner because the OTel systems is built in a way to be efficient in collecting that data. I think all of those things are very positive, and I think it proliferates the ecosystem a little bit better than having any one person have control over it. But I don't know, Mark, maybe I took a little bit of the thunder there, but what are your thoughts on OTel?
No, it's great. I like the fact that we're going toward open standards and that this is going to hopefully be something that's going to be very consumer friendly. But I kind of feel like I've had enough length in my career that I remember IPsec and some of the troubles that came from that, where you have a standard that is so open that vendors can be compliant and yet be on the far reaches of an open standard and still have some problems with interoperability. I agree with Lucas. It's not quite 100% ready because of the production comparisons between, I guess, what is a current observability standard and what OTel is. But I kind of feel like it's doing a really good job in having a reach goal for what it should be. And I'd like to see where we go with it. I do see a lot of companies are very, very eager to kind of model around OTel and see what OTel is able to provide. But I think ultimately one of the downsides of being an open standard is when you have innovation, you need to get buy-in from the group. And that means that you're probably going to see some things that are going to be in a vendor package before they make it to the world. So that's just something to be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I'll also say, the one thing I've noticed with OTel is that, these vendors have been around, all of us have been around for a long time. So we've had years to mature our own method of collecting and, bringing in data. OTel's caught up in a lot of areas pretty fast, right? Like it's not something that's just, taken forever to develop. So if it stays on its rate and pace, I think we'll be in a pretty good shape to get a lot of that stuff going in there. I agree with your point there that the areas where it does have parity, I think it's doing, phenomenally well. I think it's a great way to do it. Where it doesn't, obviously you're still stuck with some of the vendor lock-in, which nobody really wants. So I think there's a lot of motivation to move this forward for sure.
Yeah. I think we'll get there. I think we just need to give it some time and make sure that the loud voices are the ones that are pushing things toward the standards that everyone wants and not just the niche little things that people are trying to throw in because they want to put them in there.
For sure. Can't help but plug it because I'm a big fan of the open source side. I love that Elastic is jumping in and contributing on OTel in a big way. Just in general, it falls back to our roots, which is something I always love to see, which is great. Cool. I'm going to jump us to the next question here. And this one is really around consolidation. And, this is a bit of a controversial question. I don't know how, thinking about it, I wasn't even sure how I would answer it, which is, I'll give you two extremes. Would you want one tool that would just, be the end all be all? If you could think of the Lord of the Rings, one ring to rule them all, or do you like the idea of having multiple tools to help support the SRE effort and triaging and making sure you understand what issues are going on where in your system? And maybe Mark, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts here? Do you want one tool? Are you a Lord of the Ring, one ring person, or are you a multiple?
I kind of feel like it's a hard question to answer because even for places that have more than one tool, either organically through acquisitions or because they're a little bit more siloed, once they do start to consolidate or start to open up to the various groups, all different tools, you're going to find that you're going to reach for the thing that you're either most comfortable with or that you find to be sort of that best of breed or best in class tool that you want anyway. So I think that you should try and focus on that. If you're using it for answering almost all of your questions, that should probably be an indicator that's where you're going to go and that's where you should be going. But on the same vein, we were just talking about OTel. A lot of organizations, once they reach a certain point, they feel like they can't put all their eggs in one basket. So you'll see these companies will say, I've got 5 different logging solutions. I want to consolidate. That means I want to have 2. Okay, it doesn't mean they're going to have 1. So, ultimately, I think it comes down to, especially as the standards get more open, who has best performance, who has the best relevancy, and where do I feel confident that I'm going to get the support and answers that I need?
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points here. I just want to share a few on my thoughts here because I was kind of going through this reasoning when I was thinking about the question. If you think about an organization, there's a lot of buildup of human capital, right? You've got people who understand a tool, they've used it for a long time, they're experts in it, they know what they're doing with it. So there's that piece of it. Then there's the tool itself. Is it performing? Is it doing what it's supposed to do from a performance point of view to get you the answers you need? And maybe sometimes good enough is good enough for the tool, but I have experts there and they know how to use it and manipulate it to do whatever they need. And then there's the last piece, which is the company that's providing that tool? Do they stand behind it? Is it a reliable tool? Am I constantly having issues with that tool? So there's a lot of pieces that go into this. And I really do agree with your point here around, I don't think there's going to be one ring to rule them all. I don't think there's going to be one tool to do it. But I do think a lot of companies are going to consolidate down to the core essentials. And those core essentials are really going to drive kind of the way you think about observability going forward. But
Sure.
enough of me, Lucas, what do you think?
Yeah. So look, I'll say the obvious up front and say, as a team that helps build and support Elastic products, my teams are extremely interested and invested in leveraging those products. That's a strategic direction we've been moving in for a long time because, as a team that builds a large scale observability platform, we're in a good position to help our own company build a best of breed product in that space. So I wanted to acknowledge from the top that I have a built-in bias here. That said, trying my best to set that bias aside. I do believe there's a lot of value in having your logs, metrics, traces, other observability data like synthetic monitors, all in the same place. Your correlation gets a lot easier when all the data is sitting together in a single cluster or set of clusters. You can correlate easier. You can create dashboards and alerts and SLOs on any or all of that data together with the same set of tools. It reduces the cognitive overhead of having to develop expertise in a bunch of different products. So I would say be very particular about when you're introducing another tool into your ecosystem. I think I agree. Like there's not going to be one ring to rule them all, but make it the minimum set of rings that you can, I guess would be my advice there. And don't underestimate the effort that it takes to properly integrate and operationalize, one more tool. So try to be biased toward one solution, and just have high standards or for when you decide to bring in something else.
It makes a lot of sense. Mark, I think I cut you off before I jumped into Lucas there. Do you want to add any more comments?
That's fine. Yeah. So, I mean, you brought up a good point as well, and that is when you're choosing a tool and solution, a lot of times people have made a large investment in their careers to knowing something, kind of also to what Lucas said about when you make this investment, you want to make sure that you're making the right choice. And one of the other struggles I've seen from a lot of leaders in the SRE and operational space is don't make me pick something that I'm going to have to defend to my CEO as a bad choice. I want to make sure that I'm picking the thing that's going to make me look like I did the right thing for my organization, because that's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to pick something because the box is shiny. I want to pick it because my people will be empowered to make the best use of the capital that I'm spending on them and the tool to keep the business running. So that's where I think that a lot of this is making sure that the people have a say in the matter, but also making sure that the leadership sees the value and that the company's goals are being met, because ultimately you're not running observability because you want to run observability. You're running it to show the business is doing what it's supposed to do. And at the end of the day, you can make sure that your shareholders or the owners or whoever is in charge can say, I'm confident this is right.
Yeah, you can't underestimate that, right? People are trying to make a living. Obviously, they're trying to do the best they can. They're trying to make a living. There's a lot of factors in it, and I 100% agree with that. It's like any purchasing decision. It really has nothing to do with observability. It's just that any purchasing decision, making an investment in a tooling system and an ecosystem, you want to leverage that investment the best as possible, for sure. I'm going to jump to the next question, which is around capacity and kind of our costs. And, this has not been traditionally an SRE function, if you will. We've played around with it a little bit. I think it's obvious because we sit in the middle of the data. We kind of know what's going on there. But there's kind of this interesting trend of the observability tools informing a lot of the capacity planning and a lot of the capacity decisions, which ultimately is resulting in costs. And I wanted to see what trends you all were seeing in your day-to-day in terms of how costs are being managed, how we're handling that, how observability is playing a role in it. And Lucas, maybe I'll start with you. What do you think there?
Yeah, so we actually have an SRE team that's dedicated to managing capacity for our cloud products. It's super important topic for us because our cloud offering is a platform that sits in between the customers and then the infrastructure we provision on their behalf in a cloud provider. So managing our capacity and what we're provisioning there directly impacts our profit margins in a very real way. So what they do a variety of different things. They provide that capacity team. They provide a set of interfaces that the control plane uses to request just-in-time provisioning of additional capacity within the cloud providers, so we don't keep extra stuff waiting around just hoping it's going to be used eventually. They also are responsible for identifying and removing excess capacity when somebody has scaled down and some infrastructure or servers or nodes in a cluster are no longer needed. like removing that. And they build tooling, by the way, to handle all that automatically. So that team isn't really in the business of doing that, doing that work themselves in a manual way. They're really a tooling team that builds tools that does all this automatically. I think the other important thing they do that's pretty interesting is they manage our bin packing processes. So if you think of all the customer workloads as like the typical containers on cargo ships, and our servers are the ships, we want to maximize how many containers we can fit on each ship so we can get rid of the extra ships. It's super inefficient to have servers that aren't completely utilized. So that capacity team develops tooling that's constantly solving that puzzle over and over and over as our customers are creating clusters, deleting clusters, expanding and shrinking clusters. And I would say we have really great fill rates. I think probably what we'd consider best in class fill rates on our underlying compute infrastructure, around 95%, which we're very proud of. One thing as well, sorry, that it highlights to me that we do that all based on observability data. So I think it's a key point there is observability data isn't just about telling people when something's wrong. Like it's the same data that's also really useful in other contexts within the business.
Yeah, that was the part I found interesting, right? It's like you've got this, and I think Mark alluded to it way back when we were talking about AI and reusing that data. You've got a treasure trove of data that you're sitting on, and it has so many applications beyond just keeping things up and running. I'm going to have a curveball question for you after this, but Mark, why don't you tell us what your thoughts are and kind of what customers are seeing as well?
Sure. I'll start by saying, so I kind of disagree with your original assertion, Fadi, which was that we're not really involved as SREs in cost. I kind of feel like that is to a point where we're not involved in the payment of these costs, but we are always there for control and understanding of costs. Anybody who's left an EC2 instance running for a significant period of time will attest to this. There's memes about that all over the internet about like person sleeping on a park bench. Why? Because I left an EC2 instance on. So I think that exactly to what Lucas was saying, it's a good understanding of how do I load things up to the point where they are in a good spot. I can meet my SLOs and I'm not in any danger of blowing through those. And I will then make sure the business is staying either profitable or able to make sure that it can kind of control its burn rate. The other side of this is also, and I've seen from observability, is people will often try and hit a certain price point without thinking about the value of that data that you were kind of mentioning from the AI perspective, but also from the general perspective, even before we start sprinkling AI and ML into it. I've been in organizations myself where it was like, okay, we're going to cut down our logs and our metrics to a certain number of hours or days. And that means that we are now we're taking visibility away from people who need to be able to use that data to make these good decisions. So it seems like it's a false economy if you start cutting back too far and cutting to the bone to say, well, I saved $100,000. I'm like, yeah, you did. But in bucket A, in bucket B, you lost $500,000. So you're in the whole 400,000. And we need to start making sure people are aware of that, because if they have good data, they can make good decisions. And if they have bad data, they can make very risky ones.
For sure. And by the way, I totally agree with your initial point about we're, the arbiters of giving the data for how that money is being used for sure. So here's my curveball for both of you. We kind of talked about, SRE saving money from a capacity planning point of view, but let's talk about it from an incident point of view and how expensive incidents are. So my curveball to you all is, whatever the cost is, we'll call that 100%, whatever the cost is to write a line of code, how much do you think it should cost to operate that? And how do you see that trend over time, right? Are the observability tools really giving us the ability to bring the cost down to operate that line of code and keep it functional and reliable and scalable? Are you seeing those costs coming down? And Mark, maybe I'll start with you with that.
Sure. No, not a problem at all. So actually, a customer of mine wrote a tool that can actually take every transaction. They're a large APM customer. They can take every transaction and actually determine how much it costs to run that transaction, how many fractions of a cent that will cost them. So that's a great use of that ability to kind of analyze. And it's not just doing observability for the sake of, is my CPU high? This is now kind of business continuity, business analysis. And I feel like that's going to be the evolution of where observability is really going to go in the future if you get to that maturity point. So I think that that's going to be important.
No, I agree totally with that. And Lucas, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the cost to operate a line of code should ideally be less than the cost to create it. I think if I tie that back to view of shifting observability left, I think it directly helps that number and drive that operational cost down, because the sooner you catch problems, it's a lot more expensive to get 50 people in a room and start troubleshooting an incident than it is to have a test based on some observability fail and let a developer know, hey, there's a problem here that you need to address. So the sooner we can bring observability into the development process, the more we're going to catch problems earlier, and they're going to be a lot less expensive to solve earlier in that process than they are going to be later in the process.
Yeah, for sure. It was interesting. I'll share a little bit of insight on an incident that we're actually having today. Maybe we share too much, but sure enough, we had an incident that was a repeat, and you hate to have repeats, right? And in this repeat, it was like, well, how many people do we have to pull into the room to get this thing resolved and get our customers, minimize the impact on our customers? And when you tally up all the hours and the brain power and the SMEs and everything that goes with it, and imagine what those people could have done if they didn't have this to work on and had something else to work on, it's astonishing, the cost, right? And sometimes we lose sight of how much it costs on the back end to not be reliable versus how much it costs on the front end to just take your time, build things right, build in the observability, and do it right from the beginning. I think Lucas and I share a tagline that we like to talk about: go slow to go fast. And I think this is one of those examples where if you're able to just take your time up front, build in the observability, build in everything that you need, you can really build much more reliable software that is super efficient from a cost point of view over the long run. Cool. I think we're now at the fun part of this conversation. We all get to talk about yourselves a little bit, and that's careers in observability. The SRE track is definitely doing well. I love to see that in most organizations, the SREs are viewed as equal partners to the developers, right? In some organizations, even more valued than the developers themselves. And the recognition here is that, reliability and scale really, really matters. So my question to you all is, one, tell us a little bit about how you became an SRE, and then two, what would you recommend to an early start, how to become a good SRE, and what you think about your career in SRE overall? Lucas, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty common to find people who end up as SREs come from one of two tracks. There's more than two, but there's two pretty typical ones. Ones are people who might have in the past been called like systems engineers or systems administrators, or even like prior to that, like old, Unix sysadmins, who have kind of come up and evolved as that discipline has evolved into SRE. And then you have people that came directly from the software engineering track and kind of came the other way. I'm the former. I have been a user and administrator of Linux and various flavors of Unix for a long time, and really enjoy actually hardware and understanding how things work from the very bottom as much as I can. And so that's been something that's kind of where I started, but I've always been interested in software engineering too. So I think before we were calling it SRE, or I think maybe Google was, but before everybody was calling it SRE, I found myself as a systems engineer at a variety of different places, really engaging with the software engineering teams, maybe more than most of my peers, and debugging code and eventually helping write software, and really wanting to understand. I think that was really driven from, I like to know how stuff works, from top to bottom as much as I can. So that's kind of was my path to it. Was your other part, like, what would I recommend?
Yeah, what would you recommend to someone starting new to get on the path to an SRE?
I'd say, in looking at this list, I'd say start with, if I was going to pick one thing, I'd say start with distributed systems design. I think, one, it's going to be relevant in most modern tech companies. It's going to give you a good base to build on. I don't know how you'd build out monitoring or observability for a distributed system well without understanding how and why that system was designed the way that it is. So, and I think also in a lot of ways, as we talk about observability, modern observability platforms are distributed systems. I've mentioned a few times the observability platform our SRE teams build and operate at Elastic. Well, that platform is over 200 clusters and thousands of nodes just for our observability platform. So for me, and then also based on kind of what the skill sets I'm looking for when I'm hiring folks into SRE here, a solid understanding of distributed systems is a great foundation that you can build a lot of other things on top of.
Totally agree there. Totally agree. Mark, what are your thoughts? Tell us your story, how you got here, and what your thoughts on observability.
So very much like Lucas, I came from the systems engineering side. I started out as a bench technician at a computer store. And I kind of felt like the evolution was sort of put in front of me of, okay, be a sysadmin. Now apply some code and levers. Now you're a systems engineer. And then sort of like the DevOps mentality. And I kind of feel like SRE is a component of that DevOps mindset of how do I start building in reliable systems and working sort of as kind of a voice for the customer's experience. So, yeah, I agree. I think that a lot of it is knowing how things work and understanding the changes that you're making and the impacts that they're going to have on the environment. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm just going to echo what you said, Lucas, on distributed systems would probably be my first choice for where somebody would kind of spend their time. But I don't want to discount understanding things like scripting and some of those other things. Like, I'm bigger on concepts. I don't care if somebody knows the tool. If they understand the concept, they can usually translate that pretty well and get there faster than somebody who's, I'm in this tool. That's all I know, and that's all I will ever know. So I kind of feel like that's a super important part for me in this. And it's funny, I actually, as an SRE manager in my previous organization, I built a curriculum around this of, when you're a junior engineer, here's what I want you to learn. When you're an intermediate engineer, here's what I want you to learn, in addition to everything that I have for the junior engineers too. And I think that that kind of builds a foundation, because one of the problems I'm seeing in some of the space is you have people that go, I've learned Kubernetes. Now I'm going to go get that bag. And I'm like, great. Do you understand networking? Do you understand what the container is doing? Do you understand what the operating system is doing, or maybe even what the hardware is doing? And how do you make these choices? And they go, I don't know. So those are some of those challenges I think are going to be important. Of, you need to kind of understand the componentry and not just the abstraction.
Couldn't agree with you more. I think we have very similar views on this. I'll share my story a little bit, because it does not follow a sysadmin style role or coming from a systems engineer role. I'm actually a semiconductor physicist. That's kind of my background. So I came into this from a totally different spot. But I think hearing you all talk about what it took to be an SRE, I think it really was boiled down to asking the question, why? Why does something work the way it does? Why does it do this? And fundamentally understanding it, so when it breaks, you know exactly how to fix it. And I think that curiosity and that almost skepticism of like, is it really doing what it's supposed to be doing? Because I don't really understand it, and I need to in order to know exactly what to do, matters a lot. If you were to ask me today what an SRE is, I would say they're a software engineer who starts lower in the stack and works their way up. Whereas software engineer traditionally is someone who starts higher up in the stack and works their way down. And I think that starting from the lower and working your way up is immensely beneficial to really understanding fundamentally how things work, and then therefore gives you the ability to be able to solve problems when they're not going your way, for sure. This has been absolutely a blast working with you all today and having these questions answered. If you found these slides pretty interesting, you can actually download them online. Again, we didn't talk too much about the slides, but I think you saw them there in the background. There's some interesting information from the actual survey that was done. I'd like to thank both Mark and Lucas for an awesome conversation. I enjoyed it, learned a lot from you all today, and I'm pretty excited for the next steps for observability. I think we're going to be there, and I'll maybe take a bet with you all on AI. Let's see where it ends up. We'll go with that. All righty. Thank you all. You all have a great rest of your day. Talk more soon. Bye-bye.